In early 1941, as negotiations between the United States and Japan dragged on amid growing mistrust, a Latin American diplomat in Tokyo picked up rumors that, had they been taken seriously, could have altered the course of World War II. His name was Ricardo Rivera Schreiber, Peru's ambassador to Japan since 1936, and what he heard in January 1941 was one of the few explicit and documented mentions of the name Pearl Harbor before the infamous day that changed the course of American history on the 7th of December 1941. Welcome to the first episode of War Shadows. Ricardo Rivera Schreiber was not a spy. He was a career diplomat, a meticulous and reserved man who had spent 5 years watching Imperial Japan harden under militaristic pressure. In late January 1941, he claimed to have received information from several Japanese sources that, in the event of a break with the United States, the Imperial Navy was planning a massive surprise air attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor using all its available forces. Rivera Schreiber considered the rumor so serious that he decided to report it immediately to the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps in Tokyo, the US Ambassador Joseph Clark Grew. On the 27th of January 1941, Grew sent the famous telegram 125 to Washington. My Peruvian colleague told a member of my staff that he had heard from many sources, including a Japanese source, that the Japanese military forces planned in the event of trouble with the United States to attempt a surprise mass attack on Pearl Harbor using all of their military facilities. He added that although the project seemed fantastic, the fact that he had heard it from many sources prompted him to pass on the information. The next day, Cordell Hull, Secretary of State in President Roosevelt's administration, ordered that the telegram be sent immediately to the War and Navy departments. The message reached Admiral Harold Stark, Chief of Naval Operations, and was distributed to the upper echelons of the Office of Naval Intelligence in Washington. However, although the information from the telegram reached the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, Admiral Husband Kimmel, via a letter from Admiral Stark dated February 1st, it was presented merely as one of many unverified rumors and did not prompt immediate preventive measures at Pearl Harbor or its operational commands. What is clear is that both Stark and intelligence officers classified Rivera Schreiber's telegram as just another rumor among the dozens of similar rumors that were already circulating at the time, and even more frequently since Japan's accession to the Tripartite Pact in September 1940. This assessment was also expressed by Ambassador Joseph Grew himself in his testimony before the Joint Congressional Committee on the investigation of the Pearl Harbor attack in December 1945, and supported by Captain Henry Smith Hutton, naval attaché at the US Embassy in Tokyo. Both men stated that the Peruvian minister's report was treated as just another rumor, similar to the numerous unconfirmable rumors that the US Embassy constantly received. On the other hand, it should be noted that for US intelligence, a massive surprise attack on US soil seemed, at least in early 1941, inconceivable, given that talks between Secretary of State Cordell Hull and Japanese ambassador to the United States Kichisaburo Nomura were already anticipated for the spring of that year. And so the Peruvian ambassador's telegram was filed away, falling into the oblivion of history.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked.
I ask that the Congress declare a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
10 months and 10 days later, on the 7th of December 1941, the Japanese combined fleet under the command of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto executed exactly the plan that Rivera Schreiber had reported. 353 aircraft launched from 6 aircraft carriers attacked Pearl Harbor, killing 2,403 Americans. The war had begun for the United States. Only then did Rivera Schreiber's warning emerge from oblivion, at least in his native country. In February 1949, now retired in Lima, Rivera Schreiber gave a long interview to the Peruvian newspaper El Comercio. For the first time, he offered a much more detailed account of what had happened in 1941. It turns out that a Japanese employee of the Peruvian consulate in Yokohama named Felipe Akakawa told him that a friend of his named Yasukisu Suganuma used to visit the Peruvian consulate sporadically. After completing their business, both Suganuma and Akakawa himself would often stay until the early hours of the morning drinking in the servants' quarters, and after drinking too much one night, Suganuma let slip. Excited by the effects of alcohol, he told Akakawa that he had a cousin in the Ministry of the Navy who constantly informed him about the Japanese Navy's preparations to confront the United States. He also stated that Japan will go to war and destroy the American fleet in the middle of the Pacific. The ambassador was informed shortly afterwards by Akakawa himself when he visited him at the Peruvian embassy in Tokyo. As Rivera Schreiber recalls, this detail genuinely concerned him when Akakawa reported Suganuma's words to him again 10 days after his first warning. However, he still had some doubts about whether what Akakawa had said was true, but a few days later, he received the same information from a second source. In his account, he mentioned that a person named Furukido Yoshida, who said he was a professor at the University of Tokyo and an interpreter for the War Ministry, told him during a visit to the embassy that Admiral Yamamoto had drawn up the final plan to attack the US fleet at Pearl Harbor, and that the Imperial Japanese Navy had been conducting drills on islands south of Japan. As the Peruvian ambassador said, it was at that point that he decided to inform Joseph Grew, the United States ambassador to Japan. However, it should be noted that these names and anecdotes never appeared in any 1941 documents, neither in Rivera Schreiber's telegram to Grew, nor in Cordell Hull's memoirs, nor in post-war Japanese interrogations, nor in US intelligence reports. Historians such as Gordon Prang, Roberta Wohlstetter, and John Toland, considered among the most rigorous on the attack on Pearl Harbor and the Pacific War in general, mention the Peruvian ambassador's warning, but always citing only the official version of the telegram. The aforementioned details were provided by Rivera Schreiber in his 1949 interview, and also included in the book Pearl Harbor, The Secret History by Juan del Campo Rodriguez, a Peruvian diplomat and writer. This author points out that the information that reached Rivera Schreiber came through anti-militarist Japanese contacts who feared the impending catastrophe. One of them, Professor Yoshida, explicitly mentioned Pearl Harbor, not San Diego or any other US base in the Pacific, a detail that today sets it apart from other warnings collected by US intelligence. However, there is a small anachronism in Rivera Schreiber's account, and that is the air exercises in the islands south of Japan. Although this is something that the Japanese did carry out and is confirmed by testimonies such as that of Captain Mitsuo Fuchida, who led the first wave of the attack on Pearl Harbor, these exercises began in late spring 1941 and not at the beginning of that year, which is when this story is set. Despite this detail, in 1983, Rivera Schreiber's widow, Teresa Kroll, sent the Consul General of the United States Embassy in Peru an affidavit in which she recounts in detail how her husband obtained and transmitted information about a possible Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in January 1941, based on a transcript that Rivera Schreiber himself had written and that she had kept. Ultimately, the conclusion that historians have reached about this almost completely forgotten episode in the history of World War II is that the core of the Peruvian ambassador's warning was real and extraordinarily accurate, considered the clearest and most specific warning of a possible Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Yet despite reaching the highest levels of the US government 11 months before the attack, it was eventually dismissed because it fit the psychological pattern that historian Roberta Wohlstetter described as the famous noise, that is, irrelevant, contradictory, or distracting information that accompanies true signs of danger in intelligence contexts, making it difficult to identify and act on real warnings. Ricardo Rivera Schreiber never sought the limelight. In his own words in 1949, he said, "Naturally, I couldn't go any further. Then came the rush of events, and on 7th December, to the astonishment of the world, the attack on Pearl Harbor took place, just as my informants had predicted." Rivera Schreiber's telegram did not change the course of history, but it did demonstrate something that history itself has confirmed time and again over the centuries. Sometimes the clearest warnings are the least heard.
Wir sind der Skyer schwarzer Haufen.
This is the Mutual Broadcasting System.
Such the tale of a Europe in turmoil.
Upon this battle depends the survival of civilization.